The wind cut through Copper Falls like a blade fresh from the blacksmith's forge, sharp, merciless, and without discrimination. It howled down the main street, rattling the wooden signs of businesses that barely survived from one harsh winter to the next. The town itself was a scar on the landscape, carved out by miners who'd come looking for copper and found just enough to keep them chained to the mountain's unforgiving slopes. Rosie Harper stood outside the general store, her thin shawl doing nothing against the cold. Her dress, if you could call it that, was more patches than original fabric, stitched together with thread that had given up trying to match colors seasons ago. She was 22 but looked older, the kind of aging that comes from hunger and heartbreak rather than years. I said no. The store owner, Mr. Pritchard, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, his belly pressed against his vest like he was personally hoarding all the food in Copper Falls. Behind him, warm lamplight spilled onto the snow, mocking her with its promise of shelter. "I can work," Rosie said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I don't need much, just enough for..." "For what? Another week of your mother drinking it away?" Pritchard's laugh was sharp. "I've got 3 sons who can haul stock. Don't need some girl who can't lift a flour sack without breaking in half. I'm stronger than I look. You look like death warmed over." He stepped back, already closing the door. "And I don't hire Harpers. Your family's been trouble since your daddy ran off, and your mother..." He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Everyone in Copper Falls knew what her mother was, what she did to keep the whiskey flowing. The door slammed shut. Rosie stood there for a moment, watching her breath crystallize in the air. 5 stores today, 5 rejections. The bakery, the smithy, the boarding house, the saloon, and now Pritchard's. Nobody wanted her labor. Nobody wanted her presence. She was a ghost in a town that was already half dead. She pulled the shawl tighter and started walking. The Harper cabin, though calling it a cabin was generous, sat on the eastern edge of town where the buildings gave up pretending to be civilized. It was more of a lean-to that had somehow survived a decade of mountain winters through sheer spite. The roof sagged. The walls had gaps wide enough to see through. Her mother was inside, sprawled across the only chair they owned. "Took you long enough," Iris Harper slurred, not bothering to open her eyes. An empty bottle lay on its side near her feet. "You bring money." "Nobody's hiring." "Course not." Iris's laugh was bitter, broken. "Who'd hire you? Look at yourself. Scrawny little thing. Probably told them you were my daughter, and they ran you off." Rosie moved to the corner where she kept her blanket, threadbare and moth-eaten, but hers. "I tried the sip." "Don't care where you tried." Iris finally opened her eyes, and they were bloodshot, rimmed with something that might have been tears or might have just been exhaustion. "You're useless, just like your father, just like this whole goddamn town." The words should have hurt. They used to hurt, but Rosie had built calluses around her heart, the same way her hands had toughened from years of scrubbing floors and hauling water. She said nothing. "You listening to me?" Iris pushed herself up from the chair, swaying. "I said you're useless. I heard you." "Then do something about it. There's ways for a girl to make money in this town. Don't act like you don't know." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Rosie's jaw tightened. "I'm not doing that." "Oh, you're too good for it?" Iris's voice rose, shrill and sharp. "Too pure? You think you're better than me?" "I didn't say that." "You don't have to say it. I can see it in your face. That judgment, that disappointment." Iris grabbed the empty bottle, looked at it like she'd forgotten it was already drained. "You want to know what disappointment looks like? Go find a mirror, girl. 22 years old and you've done nothing. You're nothing. You cost me everything and gave me nothing back." The words landed like fists. Rosie had heard variations of this speech for years. Sometimes drunk, sometimes sober. Though sober was rare these days. Her mother blamed her for her father leaving, blamed her for the poverty, blamed her for existing. "I'm going out," Rosie said quietly. "Where? Does it matter? Don't bother coming back if you don't bring money." Rosie grabbed her shawl and walked out into the cold before her mother could say anything else. The door, what was left of it, didn't quite close behind her. It never did. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Rosie had any room left in her chest for beauty. She walked without direction, her feet crunching through the snow that had started to freeze solid as the temperature dropped. The town square was emptying out. Merchants were packing up their carts. Families were heading home to warm dinners and warmer fires. Rosie kept to the shadows, avoiding eye contact. She'd learned that lesson early. People in Copper Falls looked through her, not at her. She was furniture, scenery, a problem to step around. "Hey, Harper girl." The voice came from behind her. Rosie turned to find three young men, boys really, though they carried themselves like they owned the world. Tommy Brennan and his friends. The sheriff's son and his usual entourage of trouble. "Heard you were looking for work," Tommy said, stepping closer. His breath smelled like tobacco and something stronger. "That true?" Rosie took a step back. "Not from you. Now that's not very friendly." He grinned, showing teeth that had never known a toothbrush. "My pa's got some cleaning needs doing at the jail. Figured you might be interested." "I'm not." "Didn't even hear the offer yet." Tommy's friend spread out, casual-like, blocking her path without making it obvious. "Pays decent. Silver coin for a night's work." The way he said night's work made her skin crawl. "I said no." Tommy's grin faded. "You think you're too good for honest work? That it? You Harpers are all the same. Too proud to do what needs doing, but not too proud to beg." "I don't beg." "Sure you do. You just did it at Pritchard's store. I heard about it. You stood there begging for work like a starving dog." He stepped closer, and Rosie could smell the whiskey now, sour and thick. At least a dog knows when to roll over. One of his friends laughed. Rosie's hands clenched into fists, but she knew better than to swing. Tommy Brennan was the sheriff's son. She was nobody. The law wasn't written for people like her. "Let me through," she said, voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Or what?" "Tommy." A new voice cut through the tension. "Leave her alone." Everyone turned. Sarah Connolly stood at the edge of the square, her arms crossed. She was the schoolteacher's daughter, one of the few people in Copper Falls who'd ever spoken to Rosie with something resembling kindness. Tommy's jaw worked for a moment before he spat in the snow. "Wasn't doing nothing." "Then you won't mind moving along." For a second, Rosie thought he might push back, but Sarah had something Rosie didn't. A family name that meant something. A father who sat on the town council. Protection. Tommy and his friends shuffled off, muttering insults that were probably meant to be threatening but just sounded pathetic. Sarah walked over. "You all right?" "Fine." "You don't look fine." Sarah's eyes moved over Rosie's thin frame, the shawl that was barely holding together. "When's the last time you ate?" "I eat." "That's not what I asked." Rosie looked away. She didn't need pity, especially not from someone like Sarah who'd never missed a meal in her life. "Thanks for the help, but I'm fine." "Rosie." "I said I'm fine." The words came out harsher than intended. Sarah flinched and Rosie immediately regretted it, but she didn't apologize. Apologies were for people who had the luxury of maintaining relationships. Rosie had learned to keep everyone at arm's length. It hurt less that way. She walked away before Sarah could say anything else. The sky had gone from purple to black by the time Rosie found herself at the edge of town. Beyond the last scattered buildings, the wilderness began, dense pine forests that climbed up into mountains that had killed more people than the mine ever would. Nobody went into those woods after dark, not unless they had a death wish. Rosie stood at the boundary, staring into the darkness. She thought about her mother's words. "Don't bother coming back if you don't bring money." She thought about Tommy Brennan's offer, the way he'd looked at her like she was something to be used and discarded. She thought about Pritchard's door slamming in her face. She thought about 22 years of being unwanted, unloved, invisible. The cold bit into her skin, but she didn't move. Maybe it would be easier to just keep walking, into the woods, into the dark. Let the mountain take her the way it had taken so many others. At least that way it would be her choice, not her mother's rejection, not the town's cruelty, hers. One step, then another. The snow was deeper here, untouched by wagon wheels or foot traffic. It came up to her knees, soaking through her dress almost immediately. The cold was sharp now, painful. Her feet went numb first, then her hands. She kept walking. The trees closed in around her, blocking out what little moonlight had been filtering through the clouds. Branches scraped against her arms, caught her hair. She didn't care. She just kept moving forward because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking. She didn't know how long she walked. Time lost meaning in the darkness. But eventually, her legs gave out. She fell forward into the snow, too exhausted to catch herself. The cold was everywhere now. Inside her chest, inside her bones. It felt almost warm, in a strange way, like falling asleep. Rosie closed her eyes. This is better, she thought. Better than going back. Better than watching my mother drink herself to death. Better than being nothing. The wind howled through the trees, and for a moment, it almost sounded like voices, calling her name, telling her to get up. She didn't get up. And then footsteps. Heavy boots crunching through snow, getting closer. Rosie tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids were frozen shut. She tried to speak, but her jaw wouldn't move. All she could do was lie there, half buried in snow, waiting for whatever was coming. The footsteps stopped beside her. A voice. Male. Deep. Christ. Hands, warm, surprisingly gentle, touched her face, brushed snow from her hair. Can you hear me? She managed something between a moan and a whisper. Stupid girl, what the hell are you doing out here? She wanted to tell him she was dying, that she'd chosen this, that he should leave her alone and let the mountain finish what the town had started. But then those hands were lifting her, pulling her up out of the snow. She was wrapped in something, a coat, thick and lined with fur. And then she was being carried. Her head lolled against a broad chest. She could hear a heartbeat, strong, steady. Stay awake, the voice commanded. You hear me? Don't you dare close your eyes. But she was so tired. I said stay awake. A hand, rough, calloused, tapped her cheek. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to drag her back from the edge of sleep. That's it. Keep those eyes open. She managed to crack them halfway. All she could see was darkness and the vague shape of a face above her. A beard. Dark eyes that caught what little light existed. Who? Her voice was barely a whisper. Doesn't matter. We need to get you warm. He was moving fast now, his boots sure-footed even in the deep snow. Rosie had no idea where they were going. Part of her didn't care. She'd given up. Let whatever happened, happen. But another part, a small, stubborn part she'd thought had died years ago, was curious. The journey felt both endless and instant. One moment she was in the snow, the next she was being carried through a doorway into warmth, real warmth, the kind that hurt when it hit frozen skin. She was set down on something soft. A bed? A couch? She couldn't tell. Her vision was blurry, her whole body shaking violently as the cold started to release its grip. This is going to hurt, the voice said. And it did. Fire bloomed in her fingers and toes as circulation returned. She gasped, tried to curl in on herself, but firm hands held her still. I know, but you need to thaw out slow or you'll lose something. The man was moving around the room with practiced efficiency. She heard the crackle of a fire being built up, the clink of metal against metal. Then he was back, wrapping her in blankets. Real blankets, not the threadbare rags she was used to. Can you drink? Something warm pressed against her lips. Broth? Maybe. Or tea. She didn't care. She drank, and the warmth spread through her chest like liquid gold. Good. That's good. Her vision was starting to clear. She could see the room now, small but solid. Log walls. A stone fireplace where flames danced and crackled. Shelves lined with supplies. A rifle mounted above the door. And the man. He was big. That was the first thing she noticed. Not fat, but built like someone who'd spent a lifetime hauling logs and fighting the mountain for every inch of survival. Dark hair, longer than was fashionable in town, tied back with a leather cord. A beard that had seen better grooming. And eyes, dark brown, almost black, that looked at her with something between concern and exasperation. What's your name? He asked. Rosie. Her voice was still weak, but at least it worked. Rosie what? She hesitated. The Harper name carried weight in Copper Falls, and none of it good. Harper. Something flickered across his face. Recognition? Disgust? She couldn't tell. You from the town? She nodded. Christ. He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly tired. You know what you were doing out there? In the dark? In this cold? Walking. Walking. He repeated the word like it was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. You were walking. Into the woods. At night. In the middle of winter. Yes. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Rosie looked away, focusing on the fire instead of his eyes. Doesn't matter, she finally said. It matters if you're going to try again the moment I turn my back. I won't. How do I know that? You don't. He studied her for a long moment, and Rosie had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing more than she wanted to show. People in town looked through her. This man looked at her. Into her. Finally, he sighed. Name's Elias. Elias Blackthorne. The name meant nothing to her. She'd never heard it in town, never seen it on any business or document. You live out here? She asked. For about 5 years now. Alone? Mostly. He stood, moved to a cupboard, and pulled out bread and dried meat. You hungry? Rosie's stomach answered before she could, growling loud enough to echo in the small cabin. Elias almost smiled. Almost. I'll take that as a yes. He handed her a thick slice of bread and some meat. Rosie tore into it like a starving animal, not caring how it looked. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had real food. Not scraps, not moldy bread. Real filling food. Elias watched her eat with that same unreadable expression. When she finally slowed down, he spoke. You can stay tonight. Storm's coming in, and I'm not sending anyone back out into that. But tomorrow, when the weather clears, you're going back to town. No. The word came out before she could stop it. Elias raised an eyebrow. No? I can't go back. Why not? Because there's nothing there for me. You got family? A mother who wants me dead. She said it flatly, matter of fact, the way someone might comment on the weather. Elias's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That why you were out in the snow? Rosie didn't answer. She didn't need to. Elias was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The storm he'd predicted was rolling in. You can stay tonight, he repeated. Tomorrow, we'll figure something out. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even really kindness. But it was more than anyone else in Copper Falls had given her. Rosie pulled the blankets tighter around herself and nodded. That night, she slept in front of the fire while Elias took the bed in the corner. She woke up several times, disoriented and half convinced this was a dream. But each time, the warmth was real. The crackling fire was real. The solid walls keeping out the wind were real. And in the morning, when weak sunlight finally filtered through the shutters, Elias was already up, making coffee over the fire. He glanced at her. Storm's still going. You're stuck here another day at least. Rosie sat up slowly, testing her limbs. Everything ached, but in a distant way, like her body was remembering what it felt like to not be in constant pain. I can work, she said, for the food, for staying. Work doing what? Whatever you need. I can cook, clean, haul water. Elias poured coffee into 2 tin cups. You know how to shoot? No. Trap? No. Dress a deer? No. He handed her a cup. Then what exactly can you do? It was a fair question, and Rosie didn't have a good answer. She'd spent her whole life in town, doing whatever odd job she could scrape together. She knew how to scrub floors and mend clothes and stretch a single potato into something resembling a meal. But out here, in the wilderness, those skills probably seemed useless. I can learn, she said quietly. Elias studied her over the rim of his cup. Can you? Yes. Why should I believe you? Because I don't have anywhere else to go. It was the truth, raw and ugly and desperate. But it was all she had. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his cup and stood. Fine. You want to stay? You work. Pull your weight or you're gone. Understood? Understood. And I don't do charity. You eat what you earn. Nothing more. That's fair. He looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was serious or just telling him what he wanted to hear. Finally, he nodded. Storm should clear by tomorrow. We'll start then. Rosie wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into her palms. For the first time in as long as she could remember, something that wasn't quite hope flickered to life in her chest. Maybe she wouldn't survive out here. Maybe Elias would change his mind and send her back to town. Maybe the mountain would kill her anyway. But at least she'd tried. At least she'd chosen something other than freezing to death in the snow. That had to count for something. The storm didn't clear the next day, or the day after that. 3 days of snow piling up outside the cabin, the wind screaming through the trees like something alive and angry. Elias moved through it all with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen worse, but Rosie could tell even he was getting restless. He kept checking the shutters, watching the sky through the cracks in the wood, muttering things under his breath that she couldn't quite make out. On the morning of this 4th day, he woke her before dawn. "Get up, we've got work." Rosie pushed herself off the floor where she'd been sleeping, her body stiff and sore. The fire had burned down to embers during the night, and the cold had crept back in through every gap in the walls. "What kind of work?" "The kind that keeps us from starving." He tossed her a thick wool coat, too big for her but warm. "Storm's breaking. We need to check the traps before the animals get smart and move on." She pulled on the coat, stumbling slightly as she stood. Her legs still didn't feel quite solid under her. 3 days of eating real food had helped, but her body was still playing catch-up from years of near starvation. Elias handed her a pair of boots. "These will be too big, but stuff some cloth in the toes. Better than freezing your feet off." The boots were massive, clearly meant for a man twice her size. But she did as he said, wrapping her feet in strips of cloth before shoving them into the leather. It wasn't comfortable, but it would work. Outside, the world had been transformed. Snow covered everything in smooth, deceptive drifts that hid rocks and fallen branches and sudden drops in the terrain. The sky was that pale gray that came just before sunrise, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Elias moved ahead of her, breaking trail through snow that came up past his knees. Rosie followed in his footsteps, trying to match his pace and failing. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her lungs burning from the cold and the exertion. "Keep up," he called back without turning around. "I'm trying." "Try harder." She gritted her teeth and pushed forward. Pride, stupid, useless pride, kept her from asking him to slow down. She'd told him she could work. She'd told him she could learn. Complaining now would just prove him right about her being useless. The first trap was empty, so was the second. At the third, Elias knelt down and examined the disturbed snow around the mechanism. "Something got here first," he said. "Weasel, maybe, or a fox." "Is that bad?" "Means we're not the only ones hunting." He reset the trap with practiced movements, his hands working quickly despite the cold. "Animals get desperate in winter, same as people." They moved on. The 4th trap had a rabbit, frozen solid in the snow. Elias pulled it free, checked it over, then stuffed it into the pack he carried. "That's dinner," he said. "If we're lucky, we'll get one more before we head back." They didn't get lucky. The remaining traps were either empty or had been raided by other predators. By the time they turned back toward the cabin, the sun was fully up and Rosie's legs were shaking with exhaustion. "How far do we walk?" she asked, her voice coming out more breathless than she intended. 4 miles out, 4 back. 8 miles. She just walked 8 miles through snow in oversized boots with cloth stuffed in the toes. Her feet felt like bloody stumps, and she was pretty sure she'd worn holes through her stockings. Back at the cabin, Elias showed her how to skin and dress the rabbit. It was messy, unpleasant work that made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to watch and learn. He worked with the kind of casual brutality that came from necessity. No wasted movements, no hesitation. "You squeamish?" he asked, glancing up at her face. "No." "You look green." "I'm fine." He snorted but didn't argue. When he was done, he handed her the skinned carcass. "You know how to cook this?" "I can figure it out." "Figuring it out wastes food. I'll show you." He walked her through it, how to joint the meat, which parts to use for stew and which to roast, how to get every last bit of value from the bones and organs. Rosie listened and watched, committing it all to memory. This wasn't like cooking in town, where you could waste scraps and make mistakes. Out here, every ounce mattered. That night, they ate rabbit stew with wild onions Elias had stored from the previous autumn. It was simple food, but it tasted better than anything Rosie could remember eating in Copper Falls. "You did all right today," Elias said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Rosie looked up, surprised. "I slowed you down." "You kept up. That's different." He sopped up the last of his stew with a piece of bread. "Most people from town wouldn't make it a mile out here. Most people from town have better sense than to try." That's probably true. They fell back into silence, but it felt less heavy now. Less like two strangers forced together by circumstance and more like Something else. Not quite companionship, but not complete isolation either. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, check the traps, haul water from the creek that ran a quarter-mile from the cabin, chop wood, tend the fire, cook, mend, clean, prepare for the next day. It was brutal work that left Rosie's hands cracked and bleeding, her muscles screaming in protest. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, her body began to adapt. The boots stopped feeling quite so massive. The walk to the trap stopped leaving her gasping for air. Her hands developed calluses thick enough to grip an axe without the handle tearing her skin open. Elias didn't praise her. He didn't need to. She could see it in the way he stopped checking over her work, the way he started trusting her with more complicated tasks. Action spoke louder than words out here. 3 weeks in, he took her hunting. "You ever fired a rifle?" he asked, pulling the weapon down from above the door. "No." "Then you're about to learn." He handed it to her. "This is a Winchester, 15 shots if you load it right. You treat it with respect and it'll keep you alive. You get careless and it'll kill you faster than the cold ever could." The rifle was heavier than she expected. She held it awkwardly, not sure where to put her hands. Elias adjusted her grip, his hands rough and impersonal. "Stock against your shoulder. Firm, but not tight. You tense up and the recoil will bruise you." "Where am I aiming?" "Nowhere yet. First, you learn to hold it without shooting yourself in the foot." It took an hour of standing in the snow, holding the rifle in different positions, before Elias was satisfied she wouldn't immediately maim herself. Then he led her into the woods, moving quietly through the trees. "You see that pine about 50 yards out?" he whispered, pointing. "The one with the broken branch?" Rosie squinted. "Yes. There's a target carved into the trunk. You're going to hit it." She raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel the way he'd shown her, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder hard enough to knock her back a step. The sound echoed through the trees, sending birds scattering from the branches, and the target remained untouched. "Again," Elias said. She missed the second shot too, and the third. By the fifth shot, her shoulder was throbbing and her ears were ringing, but she was starting to get a feel for the weapon, the weight of it, the kick, the way the barrel wanted to drift up and to the right if she didn't compensate. The sixth shot hit the tree, not the target, but the tree. "Better," Elias said. "Keep going." By the time she ran through the entire 15-round magazine, she'd hit the actual target twice. Elias reloaded the rifle and handed it back to her. "We're not leaving until you can hit it 5 times in a row." It took 3 hours. Her shoulder was one massive bruise by the time they trudged back to the cabin, and she was pretty sure her hearing would never fully recover. But she'd done it, 5 shots in a row, center mass on the target. "Not bad," Elias said as they stepped inside and the warmth hit them. "Most people take a week to get that far." Rosie set the rifle carefully against the wall, her hands shaking from cold and exertion. "You're just saying that." "I don't say things I don't mean." She looked at him, trying to figure out if he was mocking her, but his face was serious, neutral. He meant it. Something warm bloomed in her chest. Not quite pride, but close enough to it that she had to look away. That night, over dinner, Elias asked the first personal question he'd posed since she'd arrived. "What happened with your mother?" Rosie's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "You said she wanted you dead. I'm asking what happened." For a moment, Rosie considered lying, or deflecting, or just refusing to answer. But something about the quiet cabin, the crackling fire, the way Elias was looking at her, not with pity but with simple curiosity, made her want to tell the truth. "She started drinking after my father left. I was 8. He just walked out one day and never came back. And she blamed me for it." "Why would she blame you?" Because she needed someone to blame, and I was there." Rosie set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. "At first it was just words. Mean things said when she was drunk, but then the words turned into other things. She'd forget to buy food, or she'd sell what we had for whiskey money. I started working when I was 10, just trying to keep us fed, but it was never enough." "Where was the law in all this?" Rosie laughed, bitter. "The sheriff? He was too busy collecting fees from the miners to care about one drunk woman and her daughter. And everyone else in town, they just looked the other way. Easier to pretend they didn't see." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Your father ever come back? No. I used to think maybe he would, that he'd show up one day and take me away from all of it. But that was just a stupid kid's dream. Not stupid, just hopeful. Same thing, isn't it? No. Elias stood and moved to the fire, poking at the logs with an iron rod. Stupid is expecting the world to be fair. Hope is deciding to keep going anyway. Rosie watched him, this strange man who'd pulled her out of the snow and taught her to shoot and never asked for anything in return except work. Why'd you help me? He didn't turn around. Would have been wrong not to. Most people don't care about wrong and right when it's inconvenient. I'm not most people. No, Rosie agreed quietly. You're not. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that came from two people who'd said enough and didn't need to fill the space with meaningless words. Eventually, Elias spoke again, his voice low. I had a wife. And a daughter. Rosie's breath caught. He'd never mentioned family before, never mentioned anything about his life before the mountain. What happened to them? Fever. 5 years ago. Both of them within a week of each other. He was still staring into the fire, his face cast in shadows. I was working the mines back then, down in Copper Falls. Came home one day and found them both burning up. The doctor said there was nothing he could do, just wait. I'm sorry. Everyone was sorry. Whole town was sorry. Sorry enough to show up to the funeral and say the right words. But none of them were sorry enough to help when it mattered. When we needed medicine, when we needed food because I'd spent everything on the doctor. His jaw tightened. I buried them on a Tuesday, left town on a Wednesday, haven't been back since. The pieces clicked into place. The isolation. The anger that sometimes flashed across his face when he talked about the town. The way he'd looked at her that first night, like he was seeing someone else. How old was your daughter? 7. The same age Rosie had been when her life started falling apart. No wonder he'd pulled her out of the snow. No wonder he'd let her stay despite every practical reason to send her back. I'm not trying to replace them, Rosie said quietly. I know I can't do that. I know you're not. Elias finally turned to look at her. But you're here, and they're not. And I've got to figure out how to live with that. The weight of his words settled between them. Two broken people trying to survive in a world that had taken everything and given nothing back. Rosie stood and walked over to where he was standing. She didn't touch him. That felt like too much, too soon. But she stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. Thank you, she said, for pulling me out of the snow, for teaching me, for not sending me back. Elias nodded, just once. You've earned your keep. It was the closest thing to acceptance she'd ever gotten from anyone, and it was enough. Winter deepened. The snow piled higher. The temperature dropped so low that the creek froze solid, and they had to melt snow for water. The traps yielded less and less as the animals went into hibernation or migrated to lower elevations. But Rosie didn't go hungry. Elias had stocked the cabin with enough supplies to last through the worst of it. Dried beans, salted meat, flour, coffee. They rationed carefully, but there was always food. And she was learning, not just how to survive, but how to live out here, how to read the weather by the way the wind shifted, how to tell the difference between animal tracks in the snow, how to keep the fire going all night so they didn't wake up to frost on the inside walls. She still wasn't good at most of it. She lost feeling in her fingers at least once a week from not wearing the right gloves. She tripped over her own feet when she was tired. She burned dinner more often than she'd like to admit. But she was getting better, slowly, incrementally, in ways that probably didn't matter to anyone but her. And Elias noticed. You've put on weight, he said one morning, completely matter of fact. Rosie looked down at herself. He was right. Her dress, the same one she'd been wearing when she left Copper Falls, didn't hang quite so loose anymore. Her arms had actual muscle instead of just bone and skin. Is that bad? No, means you're not dying anymore. It was such a blunt way to put it that Rosie almost laughed. But he was right. She'd spent so long existing in a state of slow starvation that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be properly fed, to have energy that lasted past noon, to not constantly feel like she was one missed meal away from collapse. I feel stronger, she admitted. You are stronger. Could barely lift an axe when you got here. Now you can split wood without stopping every 5 minutes. I still can't shoot as well as you. Nobody shoots as well as me. He said it without arrogance, just stating a fact. But you're good enough to hit a deer at 50 yards. That's all that matters. February bled into March. The storms became less frequent, though no less brutal when they hit. Elias started talking about spring planting, about repairs that would need to be made to the cabin before the summer heat arrived. He talked like she'd be there for it, like this wasn't temporary. Rosie didn't question it. She just listened and nodded and tried not to think about what would happen if he changed his mind. If he woke up one day and decided she was more trouble than she was worth. But that day never came. Instead, on a clear morning in late March, Elias did something unexpected. He saddled up his horse, a sturdy mare named Cora, who usually stayed in the small stable behind the cabin, and told Rosie to get ready for a trip. Where are we going? South. About 15 miles. He tightened the straps on Cora's saddle. There's a ranch down in the valley. My brother runs it. Rosie froze. Your brother? Yeah, James. Haven't seen him since I moved up here, but I got word he wants to talk. Elias didn't look at her as he spoke, too focused on the horse. Thought it was time to stop hiding. You don't have to take me. Can't leave you here alone. You'd burn the cabin down. I would not. Probably not. But I'm not risking it. He finally turned to look at her. Get your coat. We're losing daylight. The ride down the mountain was nothing like Rosie had imagined. Elias put her on Cora while he walked alongside, leading the horse through terrain that would have been impossible for someone who didn't know every rock and route by heart. You ever been on a horse before? He asked. Once, when I was a kid. Didn't go well. Just hold on to the saddle horn and let Cora do the work. She's smarter than most people. The descent took hours. The higher elevations gave way to gentler slopes, and the pine forests opened up into meadows that were just starting to show the first hints of green beneath the melting snow. Rosie could see the valley spreading out below them, a patchwork of fenced pastures and cultivated fields that looked impossibly orderly after months in the wilderness. That's Blackthorn Ranch, Elias said, pointing to a cluster of buildings in the distance. Been in the family for 30 years. My father started it. James inherited it when the old man died. And you? I got the mountain. He said it without bitterness, just stating facts. Suited me better anyway. As they got closer, Rosie could make out details. The main house was large and well-maintained, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. There were several barns, a bunkhouse, corrals filled with horses and cattle. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and she could hear the distant sounds of men working, hammers on metal, cattle lowing, someone shouting instructions. It looked like civilization, like the opposite of everything she'd learned to survive in over the past months. Her stomach twisted with nerves. Elias, she said quietly, what if they don't want me here? He looked up at her, one hand on Cora's bridle. Then we leave. Just like that? Just like that. The simplicity of it, the absolute certainty in his voice, settled something in her chest. She nodded, and they continued forward. They were spotted before they reached the main house. A man came striding out from one of the barns, tall and broad-shouldered, with the same dark hair as Elias, though his was cut shorter and streaked with early gray. Well, hell, the man said, stopping a few feet away. Thought you died up on that mountain. Not yet. Elias's voice was carefully neutral. The man, James it had to be, looked at Rosie with open curiosity. And who's this? Rosie Harper. She's been staying with me. James's eyebrows rose. Staying with you, on the mountain, through winter. That's right. Hell, James said again, but this time there was something like amusement in his voice. He looked at Rosie more carefully. Harper, you said? Any relation to Iris Harper from Copper Falls? Rosie's jaw tightened. She's my mother. Thought you looked familiar. Saw you in town a few times. He glanced at Elias. She know you've got her daughter up on the mountain? Don't know. Don't care. James studied them both for a long moment, and Rosie had the uncomfortable feeling she was being evaluated, judged, found wanting or acceptable. She couldn't tell which. Finally, James smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and welcoming in a way that caught her off guard. Well, come on then. Martha's got dinner going, and she'll skin me alive if I let you stand out here freezing when there's hot food inside. He turned and started walking toward the house. Fair warning, she's going to ask 1,000 questions. Woman's got more curiosity than sense. Elias helped Rosie down from Cora, his hand steadying her when her legs wobbled from the long ride. You good? Yeah. James is a lot, but he's all right. He seems nice. Don't let that fool you. He's shrewd as they come. They followed James into the house, and the warmth hit Rosie like a physical force. It wasn't just the temperature, though there were fires burning in 2 separate fireplaces. It was the feeling of the place. Lived in. Loved. The kind of home that had seen generations of family dinners and celebrations and ordinary precious moments. A woman appeared from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She was probably in her late 30s, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Elias Blackthorne, she said, her voice carrying a mix of exasperation and affection. 5 years. 5 years without a word, and you just show up like... She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes landing on Rosie. Oh. Martha, this is Rosie, James said. She's been staying with Elias. Martha's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, curiosity, and something that might have been concern. But when she spoke, her voice was warm. Well, you look half frozen. Come sit by the fire, both of you. Dinner's almost ready. Dinner turned out to be a massive spread. Roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables that had been stored in a root cellar over winter, and a pie made with preserved apples. It was more food than Rosie had seen in one place since ever, possibly. They sat around a large wooden table, and Martha served generous portions while asking questions that were nosy but not unkind. So how did you two meet? Elias glanced at Rosie, giving her the option to answer or stay silent. She took a breath and decided on something close to the truth. I got lost in a storm. He found me. Lost? Martha repeated, clearly not buying the simplified version, but polite enough not to push. Well, you're lucky he did. That mountain's killed more people than I can count, I'm aware. And you've been up there all winter, just the two of you? Yes, ma'am. Martha's eyes narrowed slightly, not in judgment, but in calculation. You know people will talk. People always talk, Rosie said quietly. That's true enough. Martha passed her the bread basket. Eat. You're too thin. The dinner conversation flowed around Rosie like a river. James and Elias catching up on 5 years of separation, Martha interjecting with comments and questions, the easy rhythm of family that Rosie had never experienced. She mostly stayed quiet, listening and trying not to feel like an intruder. But then Martha turned to her directly. You know how to work a ranch? No, ma'am. I know how to work a mountain, though. Somewhat. Martha smiled at that. Somewhat is better than most. We could use help around here if you're interested. Spring calving's coming, and we're short-handed. Rosie looked at Elias, uncertain. He was watching her with that same unreadable expression. It's your choice, he said. I don't know anything about cattle. You didn't know anything about trapping either, Elias pointed out. Didn't stop you from learning. James leaned back in his chair, studying her. Martha's right. We need help. Pays fair. Room and board, plus a wage. You'd be working alongside the other hands, doing whatever needs doing. It's hard work, but you look like you're used to that. It was an offer, a real offer. Not charity, not pity, but actual employment based on something other than her last name or her mother's reputation. Rosie's hands tightened on her fork. I'd have to think about it. Fair enough, James said. Offer stands as long as you need. After dinner, Martha showed Rosie to a small room off the kitchen. You'll stay here tonight. Fresh sheets, clean water for washing. If you need anything, just holler. Thank you. Martha paused in the doorway. Can I ask you something? Yes, ma'am. What are you running from? The question was direct but not harsh. Rosie met Martha's eyes and saw genuine concern there, not judgment. Everything, Rosie said honestly. Everyone. A life that was killing me slowly. Martha nodded slowly. And Elias? Elias gave me a chance when nobody else would. He's a good man. Got dealt a bad hand, but he's good. Martha's expression softened. Whatever you decide, stay, go, something else, you make sure it's what you want. not what you think you owe him, not what's easiest, what you actually want. It was good advice, kind advice, the kind that came from someone who'd lived long enough to know the difference between surviving and living. I will, Rosie promised. That night, lying in a real bed with clean sheets and a roof that didn't leak, Rosie stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what she actually wanted. The mountain had been hard, brutal even. Every day was a fight against cold and hunger and exhaustion. But it had also been simple, clear. Her life distilled down to basic survival: eat, sleep, work, repeat. Here, at the ranch, things would be different, more complicated. She'd be around people again, people who might ask questions, people who might recognize her from Copper Falls and remember her mother, her past, all the things she'd tried to leave behind in the snow. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to build something more than just survival, to have a wage, to be part of something, and maybe, just maybe, to figure out who she was when she wasn't just trying not to die. Sleep came eventually, though her dreams were restless. She kept seeing the cabin on the mountain, Elias teaching her to shoot, the quiet moments by the fire. And then the dreams would shift and she'd see the ranch, Martha's kindness, James's shrewd evaluation, the possibility of something resembling a normal life. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window and someone was knocking on the door. "Rosie? You awake?" It was Elias. She sat up, quickly finger-combing her hair into something less chaotic. "Come in." He opened the door but didn't step inside, respecting the boundary of her space. "James wants to show you around the ranch, if you're interested." "Are you staying?" "For a few days, yeah. Then I need to get back. Garden won't plant itself." Rosie stood, smoothing down her dress. It was the same one she'd been wearing for months, and it looked every bit as worn and patched as it was. She felt suddenly self-conscious in this clean, ordered house. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. Elias was quiet for a moment. "I think you should do whatever keeps you alive and gives you a reason to stay that way." "That's not an answer." "Sure it is. You just don't like it." He wasn't wrong. She wanted him to tell her what to do, to make the choice for her so she wouldn't have to carry the weight of it, but that wasn't fair to him. And it wasn't fair to herself. "I'll talk to James," she said. "See what the work actually involves." "Good." He turned to leave, but Rosie called out, "Elias?" "Yeah?" "If I stayed here, would you visit?" His expression softened, just slightly. "Mountain's only 15 miles away. I'd visit." It wasn't a promise. Exactly. But it was close enough. The tour of the ranch took most of the morning. James walked her through the barns, the corrals, the fields that would need plowing come April. He introduced her to the ranch hands, a mix of young men and a few older cowboys who'd been working blackthorn land for years. They looked at her with curiosity, but not hostility. Just another potential worker in a place that always needed more hands. "Spring's our busiest season," James explained as they walked. "Calving starts soon and we'll be running from sunup to sundown, making sure nothing goes wrong. Then there's planting, fence repairs, breaking new horses. It doesn't stop until late autumn." "What would I be doing?" "Whatever needs doing. Might be mucking stalls one day, helping with a difficult birth the next. Martha handles most of the house stuff, but she'll need help with cooking for the hands, laundry, that sort of thing. You'd be working alongside everyone else. No special treatment." "I don't want special treatment." James glanced at her. "Good. Because you wouldn't get it." He stopped near one of the corrals where several horses were gathered. "Can you ride?" "Barely." "You'll learn. Out here, you need to be able to get from one end of the property to the other without walking the whole way." They continued the tour, and with every barn and field and piece of equipment, Rosie felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was real. This was a life she could actually have. Wages, a place to sleep, work that mattered. But it also meant leaving the mountain, leaving Elias, at least most of the time, leaving the strange, harsh sanctuary that had taught her she was stronger than she'd ever believed. By afternoon, when James brought her back to the main house, her head was spinning. Martha was in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. She looked up when they entered. "Well, what do you think?" "It's a lot," Rosie admitted. "It is. But you seem like someone who can handle a lot." Martha shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "James told you the terms?" "Room, board, and wages." Fair wages, Martha emphasized. Same as any other hand. You work hard, you get paid. You slack off, you're gone. Simple as that. It was the same kind of straightforward honesty Elias dealt in. Rosie appreciated it. I'd like to try, she said. If the offer's still open. James nodded. It is. You can start tomorrow if you want. Tomorrow, Rosie repeated. It felt too soon and not soon enough at the same time. That evening, she found Elias in the stable checking on Cora. He was running a brush over the mare's coat with long, steady strokes. I'm staying, Rosie said. He didn't look up from his work. Figured you would. You're not upset? Why would I be upset? It's a good opportunity. But the cabin will still be there. He set down the brush and finally met her eyes. You don't owe me anything, Rosie. I pulled you out of the snow because that's what you do when you find someone dying. You stayed through winter because you worked for it, but you don't owe me your future. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they made her chest ache. I didn't stay just because I owed you, she said quietly. I know. Do you? He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Yeah, I do. The space between them felt charged with something neither of them knew how to name. Rosie took a step closer. Will you really visit? I said I would. Promise? I don't make promises I can't keep. It should have frustrated her, that refusal to commit. But she understood it. Promises were dangerous things. They created expectations that could shatter. Then just don't forget about me, she said. Elias's expression softened. Not likely. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder once, brief and gruff, before going back to brushing Cora. It wasn't much, barely even qualified as affection, but it was more than he'd given anyone in 5 years. It was enough. The next morning, Elias left before dawn. Rosie woke to find him gone, Cora's stall empty, the mountain path already marked with fresh tracks in the melting snow. He hadn't said goodbye, hadn't made a big production out of leaving. He'd just gone, the same way he did everything, quiet, efficient, without fanfare. Martha found her standing in the stable doorway, staring up at the mountain. He'll be back, Martha said gently. Elias doesn't let people in easy, but once he does, he doesn't let go either. Rosie hoped she was right. The work started that same day. James put her with Martha initially, learning the rhythms of the ranch house, cooking for a dozen hungry men, managing supplies, keeping the place running. It was different from the mountain, but no less demanding. And slowly, carefully, Rosie began to build something new. Not a replacement for what she'd found on the mountain, but an addition to it. A foundation that might, just might, support the weight of an actual life. The girl who'd been left to die in the snow was still there, still part of her. But she was becoming something else, too. Something stronger. Something that might actually survive. Spring came hard to the valley, all mud and chaos and animals determined to be born at the worst possible moments. Rosie learned quickly that ranch work didn't care about convenience or comfort. A cow went into labor at 3 a.m, you got up and helped. A fence broke during a rainstorm, you fixed it while getting soaked to the bone. The work was relentless, but it was honest. She'd been at Blackthorn Ranch for 6 weeks when the first calf came breech. Martha shook her awake in the dark, her voice urgent. Need you in the barn, now. Rosie stumbled out of bed, pulling on clothes that still smelled like yesterday's sweat and hay. Outside, rain hammered against the ground, turning everything into slick mud that sucked at her boots with every step. In the barn, James was already shoulder-deep in the laboring cow, his face tight with concentration. 2 of the ranch hands stood nearby with lanterns, their expressions grim. Can't turn it, James said through gritted teeth. Legs are twisted wrong. You want me to try? Martha asked. Your hands are bigger than mine, won't help. James pulled back, his arm covered in blood and fluid. He looked at Rosie. You. Get over here. Me? You got the smallest hands. Might be able to reach what I can't. Rosie's stomach dropped. I don't know what I'm doing. I'll tell you. Move. She moved. James grabbed her arm and shoved it into warm water to clean it, then guided her hand toward the cow. The animal bellowed, its whole body straining. Easy, James said to the cow, his voice gentle despite the urgency. Then to Rosie, you're going to feel the calf's legs. They're folded back. You need to straighten them out so we can pull. Rosie's hand slid into impossible heat and pressure. The cow's muscles contracted around her arm, and for a second she panicked, certain she'd be crushed. But then her fingers found what James was describing, tiny hooves bent at wrong angles. I feel them. Good. Now cup your hand around one hoof and guide it forward, gentle but firm. Gentle but firm, while a 1,000-pound animal was trying to push her arm out of its body. Oh, right. She worked by feel, sweat running down her face despite the cold barn. The calf's leg resisted, then suddenly gave way, straightening with a pop she felt more than heard. Got one, she gasped. Other one. Same thing. The second leg was worse. It was wedged deeper, tangled somehow. Rosie's shoulder screamed in protest as she reached further, her face pressed against the cow's flank. Her fingers slipped once, twice, then caught. Come on, she muttered. Come on, you stubborn ookie. The legs straightened. Both legs are forward, she said. Pull your arm out, slow. She did, and James immediately moved in with ropes, looping them around the calf's exposed hooves. On 3, we pull. 1, 2, 3. They hauled. The cow bellowed, and suddenly the calf was sliding out in a rush of fluid and membrane, landing in the straw with a wet thump. For a horrible moment, it didn't move. Then Martha was there with a towel, rubbing the calf vigorously, clearing its nose and mouth. Breathe, baby. Come on. The calf's ribs expanded, once, twice. Then it bleated, a thin, shaky sound that was the most beautiful thing Rosie had ever heard. There you go, Martha said, relief obvious in her voice. The mother cow turned her massive head, sniffing at her newborn. Within minutes, the calf was struggling to stand on wobbly legs, and the crisis was over. James sat back in the straw, exhausted. Good work, Harper. It was the first time he'd used her last name without it feeling like an insult. Rosie looked down at her arm, covered in blood and worse. Her whole body was shaking from adrenaline. I just did what you said. No, you kept your head and got it done. That's different. He stood, wincing. Clean up. We've got 4 more cows due this week. As Rosie walked back to the house through the rain, something shifted in her chest. She'd helped bring life into the world. Actual, breathing, messy life. Her hands had done that. It felt important in a way she couldn't quite name. Martha was waiting with hot water and soap. First breech delivery? Yeah. You did good. Most people freeze up their first time. I almost did. But you didn't. Martha handed her a towel. That's what matters. Over breakfast, coffee and biscuits that Martha had somehow found time to make despite being up half the night, James laid out the day's work. Fence repairs in the north pasture, hay delivery to the upper barn, breaking a new mare that had been giving the hands trouble. Rosie, you're with me on the fence, he said. Martha raised an eyebrow. She just pulled a calf, maybe let her rest. Ranch doesn't stop for rest, but James's voice wasn't harsh. She can handle it. He was right. She could. Her body ached and her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she could handle it. They spent the morning riding the fence line, finding breaks and weak points. James worked with the same efficient silence as Elias, only speaking to give instructions or point out something she needed to see. This post is rotted, he said, kicking at the base. See how it wobbles? Won't last another season. Rosie examined it, noting the soft wood, the way insects had burrowed through. How do you replace it? Dig out the old one, set a new one, pack it tight. Takes about an hour if the ground's not frozen. Want me to try? James studied her. You know how to dig? I can figure it out. He almost smiled. Where have I heard that before? He handed her a shovel, and Rosie got to work. The ground was softer than she expected from the rain, but that just meant the mud was heavier. Every shovelful felt like it weighed 20 pounds. Her shoulders burned. Her hands, still tender from the morning's work, started to blister. She kept digging. James watched for a while, then went to work on another post further down the line. The message was clear. He trusted her to get it done without supervision. By the time she dug out the old post and wrestled the new one into position, the sun was directly overhead, and she was covered head to toe in mud. But the post was solid, packed tight, ready to hold wire for another decade. James came back to inspect it. He grabbed the post and shook it hard. It didn't budge. Good, he said. Let's eat. They sat in the grass, eating the lunch Martha had packed. Bread, cheese, dried apples. The valley spread out below them, green and alive with the promise of summer. You planning to stay past spring? James asked. The question caught Rosie off guard. I don't know. Haven't thought that far ahead. You should. Need to know how many hands I'll have come summer. Is that an offer for permanent work? If you want it. James took a long drink from his canteen. You're a good worker. Don't complain. Don't start drama. That's worth something. What about... Rosie hesitated. What about my mother? When people find out I'm here, what about her? She's got a reputation. So? James looked at her steadily. You're not your mother. Way I see it, you're Rosie Harper, who pulled a breech calf and dug fence posts in the mud. That's who you are on my ranch. What your mother did or didn't do in Copper Falls isn't my concern. The simple acceptance of it, the refusal to judge her by someone else's mistakes, made Rosie's throat tight. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep working. They finished lunch in comfortable silence, then went back to the fence line. By evening, they'd repaired 8 posts and restrung half a mile of wire. Rosie's hands were raw, her back screaming, but the work was done. Riding back to the ranch house, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Real earned pride in work well done. That night, after dinner, Martha cornered her in the kitchen while they were washing dishes. James told me he offered you permanent work. He did. What'd you say? I said I'd think about it. Martha handed her a plate to dry. Can I give you some advice? Sure. Stop waiting for permission to build a life. Martha's voice was gentle but firm. I see it in your eyes. You're always looking over your shoulder, waiting for someone to tell you this isn't real, that you don't deserve it. But you do. You've earned it. 6 weeks. So? You think there's some magic number of weeks before you're allowed to stop punishing yourself? Martha set down the pan she was scrubbing. I don't know everything that happened to you in Copper Falls. Don't need to. But I know you're here now, doing the work, pulling your weight. That's enough. Rosie set down the dish she'd been drying. What if I mess it up? Then you mess it up. People mess up all the time. They don't get thrown out for being human. Martha's expression softened. Unless you steal or hurt someone or burn down my kitchen, you've got a place here. Stop acting like you're one mistake away from losing it. The words settled into Rosie like seeds in soil. She wanted to believe them. Wanted to believe she could actually stay, could actually build something permanent instead of just surviving day to day. I'll stay, she said, if the offer's still good. It's good. They finished the dishes in silence, but it was the kind of silence that felt like understanding. 2 weeks later, Elias showed up. Rosie was in the barn, mucking stalls, unglamorous work that someone had to do, when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see Cora trotting into the yard, Elias on her back with a pack strapped behind the saddle. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. She set down the pitchfork and walked out to meet him. He was already dismounting, moving with that same economic grace she remembered. You came, she said, hating how breathless she sounded. Said I would. He looked the same, dark hair, darker eyes, beard maybe slightly more trimmed than she remembered, but there was something different in the way he looked at her, like he was seeing someone new. You look good, he said. I look like I've been shoveling manure. That's what I said. Good. She laughed, surprising herself. Want to come inside? Martha's making lunch. In a minute. He reached into his pack and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Brought you something. Rosie unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a knife, not fancy, but well made, with a bone handle and a blade that had been sharpened to a perfect edge. For the work, Elias said. Every good ranch hand needs a decent knife. She ran her thumb along the handle, feeling the weight of it. This is too much. It's a knife, and you earned it. The way he said it, simple, matter-of-fact, without any expectation of gratitude, made it clear this wasn't charity. It was recognition. Thank you. He nodded once, then followed her into the house. Lunch was loud and chaotic, with half a dozen ranch hands crammed around the table alongside Martha, James, and now Elias. The men traded insults and stories, and Martha kept everyone in line with sharp comments and sharper looks. Rosie sat between Martha and Elias, acutely aware of his presence. He didn't say much, but when he did speak, people listened. There was a weight to him, an authority that came from surviving alone on the mountain for 5 years. After lunch, James pulled Elias aside for a private conversation. Rosie caught fragments, something about timber rights, a boundary dispute, water access. But mostly she tried not to eavesdrop. Instead, she went back to work. There were horses to feed, tack to mend, 100 small tasks that needed doing before dinner. She was currying one of the mares when Elias found her in the stable. James says you've been doing good work. I try. He also said you pulled a breech calf your second week here. Martha and James did most of it. I just had small hands. Elias leaned against the stall door. You always do that. Do what? Make yourself smaller than you are. He said it without judgment, just observation. On the mountain, you did the work. Here, you do the work. But you act like you're just lucky to be allowed, not like you earned it. Rosie's hand stilled on the brush. Maybe I am lucky. Luck's got nothing to do with it. He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about something. What? About why I pulled you out of the snow that night. Rosie turned to face him fully. I figured it was because you're decent. That's part of it, but it's more than that. He looked uncomfortable, like the words weren't coming easy. When I found you, you'd given up. You were ready to die, and something about that made me angry. Angry? At you, at myself, at the whole damn world. He ran a hand through his hair. My wife and daughter, they didn't choose to die. Fever took them, and there wasn't a thing they could do about it. But you chose it. You walked into those woods knowing what would happen. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be better. His eyes met hers, intense. You survived that night. You survived the winter. You're surviving here, so stop acting like you're temporary. Stop waiting for permission to take up space. It was almost exactly what Martha had said, but coming from Elias, it hit different, harder. I don't know how to do that, Rosie admitted. You learn, same way you learned everything else. He pushed off from the stall door, ready to leave, but Rosie called out, Elias? How long are you staying? Few days. Need to talk to James about some things. After that, back to the mountain. Can I come visit sometime? He looked at her for a long moment. If you want. I do? Then come. That night, Martha insisted Elias stay for dinner. A real dinner, not just the quick midday meal. She made pot roast with vegetables and biscuits, and there was even a cake for dessert. What's the occasion? One of the ranch hands asked. Can a woman bake a cake without an interrogation? Martha shot back. But Rosie caught the look Martha gave her across the table, warm and knowing. This was for her and Elias, a way of marking his visit as something special. After dinner, Rosie and Elias walked down to the creek that ran along the southern edge of the property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of that first night in the snow. You happy here? Elias asked. I think so. It's different than the mountain. Different how? There's people, expectations. I have to think about what I say, how I act. She picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the creek. On the mountain, it was just survival. Here, it's more complicated. Complicated's not always bad. No, but it's harder in some ways. They walked in silence for a while, following the creek as it wound through the pasture. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the fading light. I miss it sometimes, Rosie said quietly. The cabin, the quiet, just being able to breathe. You can always come back for visits or longer if you want. Would you mind? Why would I mind? She didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe she did, but couldn't say it out loud. That being near him felt safe in a way nothing else did. That she'd spent the last 2 months working herself to exhaustion, partly to prove she was worth saving, worth teaching, worth the effort he'd put into keeping her alive. I should get back, she said instead. Early start tomorrow. Yeah. They walked back to the ranch house together, not touching but close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. At the door, Elias paused. You really did good, Rosie. I mean it. Thanks. And when you're ready to visit the mountain, just come. Doors always open. The casual way he said it, like it was the simplest thing in the world, made her chest ache with something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite joy. Good night, Elias. Good night. He stayed for 3 more days, helping James with repairs and negotiations and the thousand small things that came with running a ranch this size. Rosie caught glimpses of him throughout the days, working in the barn, riding the fence line with James, sitting on the porch in the evening with a cup of coffee. And then, as quietly as he'd arrived, he left. Rosie watched from the kitchen window as he saddled Cora and loaded his pack. Part of her wanted to run out, to say something, to ask him to stay longer. But she didn't. She just watched as he mounted up and rode out, heading north toward the mountain. "He'll be back," Martha said from behind her. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. Elias doesn't do anything halfway. He cared enough to keep you alive through winter. That doesn't just disappear." Rosie hoped she was right. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that was becoming familiar. Work from sunup to sundown, meals with the ranch hands, evenings spent mending tack or helping Martha with household tasks. It was a good life, a full life. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, some storm on the horizon she couldn't quite see yet. The storm arrived in the form of a wagon rolling into the ranch yard on a Tuesday afternoon in late May. Rosie was carrying water to the barn when she saw it, a battered wagon pulled by an equally battered horse, driven by a woman who looked like she'd been rode hard and put away wet. Iris Harper. Rosie's blood turned to ice. Her mother climbed down from the wagon with the exaggerated care of someone who was drunk but trying to hide it. She looked around the ranch with calculating eyes, taking in the well-maintained buildings, the healthy livestock, the signs of prosperity. Then her gaze landed on Rosie. "There you are," Iris said, her voice carrying across the yard. "Been looking all over for you, girl." Every ranch hand within earshot stopped working. Martha appeared in the doorway of the house, her expression going hard. James came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Rosie set down the water buckets carefully, buying herself time to think. Her hands were shaking. "Mother, that all you got to say? Been gone for months, not a word, and all you got is mother?" Iris's laugh was bitter, ungrateful, just like always. "What do you want?" "What do I want? To see my daughter, make sure you're all right." Iris took a step closer, and Rosie could smell the whiskey even from several feet away. "Though looks like you landed on your feet just fine. Nice place. Must pay good. I work here. I bet you do." The insinuation in her mother's voice was clear, ugly. "Always knew you'd figure out how to use what you got." James stepped forward. "Mrs. Harper, this is private property. Unless you've got business here, I'll have to ask you to leave." Iris ignored him, her eyes fixed on Rosie. "Private property. Hear that, girl? You're on private property now. Too good for your own mother, living in some fancy ranch while I'm left to starve in that cabin." "Nobody left you to starve," Rosie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You told me not to come back. And you listened? What kind of daughter abandons her own mother?" The manipulation was so familiar it almost made Rosie laugh. The guilt trips, the accusations, the way her mother twisted everything to make Rosie the villain. But something had changed. Rosie had changed. "The kind who was told she was worthless every day of her life," Rosie said quietly. "The kind who got left to die in the snow because her mother couldn't be bothered to care." Iris's face flushed red. "How dare you? How dare I tell the truth?" Rosie's voice was getting stronger now, fueled by months of survival, months of learning she was worth more than her mother had ever given her credit for. "You want to know what happened that night? I walked into the woods to die because staying with you was worse than freezing to death. That's what you did. That's who you are." "You ungrateful little—" "Mrs. Harper." James's voice cut through like a whip. "Leave now." "I'm talking to my daughter." "No. You're trespassing and causing a disturbance. Leave now or I'll have the sheriff remove you." Iris looked around at the assembled ranch hands, all of whom had stopped working to watch the confrontation. For a moment, Rosie thought her mother might escalate, might make a scene that would force the sheriff to get involved. But Iris was smarter than that, or at least cunning enough to know when she was outmatched. "Fine," she spat, "but this isn't over, girl. You're still my daughter. You owe me." "I don't owe you anything." The words came out clear and strong, and Rosie realized she meant them. Completely. Her mother had given birth to her, but that was biology, not love. She'd provided shelter, but it was shelter that came with a price Rosie had been paying her entire life.
No more.
Iris climbed back into her wagon, muttering curses under her breath. She snapped the reins and the horse started forward, the wagon lurching down the road back toward Copper Falls. Rosie watched her go, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and relief and something that felt like grief. Not for her mother, but for the relationship they'd never had, for the childhood that had been stolen by addiction and cruelty. Martha was at her side suddenly, a steady hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" "I don't know." "That was brave. What you said." "Didn't feel brave, felt necessary."
Sometimes that's the same thing. The ranch hands slowly went back to work, though Rosie could feel their eyes on her. Judging or sympathizing, she couldn't tell which. Maybe both. James approached, his expression unreadable. "Is that going to be a problem?" "I don't know. Maybe. If she comes back, she's not welcome here. You understand? This is your home now. She doesn't get to take that from you."
The simple declaration, "This is your home now," made Rosie's eyes burn with unshed tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just take the rest of the day. Get your head straight." Rosie nodded and walked toward the creek, needing space, needing air, needing to process what had just happened. She sat on the bank and stared at the water, letting the sound of it wash over her. Her mother had found her, had tried to drag her back into the old patterns, the old guilt, the old pain. But Rosie hadn't broken, hadn't bent. She'd stood her ground. For the first time in her life, she'd looked her mother in the eye and said, "No." And the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. She'd survived it. As the sun set and the shadows grew long, Rosie heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Martha approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want some company." "Thanks." Martha sat beside her, handing over one of the cups. They drank in silence for a while, watching the creek flow past. "My mother was a drunk too," Martha said eventually. "Beat the hell out of me and my brothers when she was in her cups. Told us we were mistakes, that we ruined her life." Rosie looked at her in surprise. Martha had always seemed so put together, so stable. "What happened?" "I left, soon as I was old enough. Married James and never looked back." Martha took a sip of her coffee. "She died a few years later. Liver finally gave out. And you know what I felt?" "What?" "Relief. Just pure relief that I didn't have to carry that weight anymore." She looked at Rosie. "That make me a bad person?" "No, it makes you human." "Exactly. So when your mother dies, and she will, the way she drinks, you're allowed to feel however you feel. Relief, grief, anger, nothing at all. It's all valid." The permission to not feel guilty about not feeling guilty was something Rosie hadn't known she needed. "She'll come back," Rosie said quietly. "Probably. But you handled her today. You'll handle her next time, too." "What if I don't?" "Then you've got a whole ranch of people who'll help." Martha stood, offering her hand. "Come on, dinner's ready and you need to eat." Rosie took her hand and let herself be pulled to her feet. As they walked back to the house, she realized something fundamental had shifted. She'd faced her mother, the person who'd controlled her entire life through fear and guilt, and she'd won. Not because her mother had left, but because Rosie had chosen to stand firm. That night, lying in her bed, Rosie thought about the mountain, about Elias and the cabin and the brutal simplicity of survival. Part of her wanted to run back there, to hide from the complications of the ranch and the threat of her mother returning. But another part, the part that was growing stronger every day, knew that running would solve nothing. She'd come too far to retreat now. So she stayed. And she worked. And she waited to see what would come next. 3 days later, word came from Copper Falls. Iris Harper had been arrested for trying to rob Pritchard's General Store. She was in jail, awaiting trial. James delivered the news over breakfast, his voice neutral. "Sheriff says she was drunk, made a scene, took 3 men to get her in a cell." Rosie felt nothing, or maybe everything, but compressed into a tiny ball in her chest that she couldn't quite access. How long will they hold her? Judge comes through in 2 weeks. She'll likely get 30 days, maybe 60, depending on his mood. 2 months. 2 months where Rosie wouldn't have to look over her shoulder, wouldn't have to brace for another confrontation. It felt like a reprieve, a chance to breathe, but it also felt temporary. Because women like Iris Harper didn't change. They just circled back, found new angles, new ways to manipulate and hurt. Rosie would have to be ready, That afternoon, she rode out to the northern pasture where James was checking on the cattle. She found him sitting on his horse, surveying the herd with a practiced eye. "Can I ask you something?" she called out. "Sure." "Do you think people can change? Really change?" James considered the question. "Some people, yeah, if they want it bad enough and they're willing to do the work. But most people?" He shook his head. "Most people just become more of what they already are."
That's not very hopeful. Didn't say I was hopeful. I'm practical. He looked at her. Why? You thinking about your mother? Yeah. She won't change, Rosie. Best you can do is protect yourself and move forward. It was harsh truth, but Rosie appreciated it more than false comfort. James dealt in reality, not platitudes. Thank you. For what? For letting me stay, even after today.
You earned your place here. What your mother did or didn't do doesn't change that. He turned his horse back toward the ranch. "Come on. Got fence to check before dark." They rode together through the pasture, and Rosie felt something settle in her bones. This was her life now. Not perfect, not easy, but hers. And for the first time since she could remember, that was enough. Summer came to the valley with a vengeance, all heat and dust and relentless sun that baked the ground until it cracked. The work shifted with the season. Less birthing and more maintenance, endless rounds of irrigation, haying, breaking horses that had grown wild over the winter. Rosie's hands, already calloused from months of labor, developed new layers of toughness as she learned to handle rope and leather in the scorching heat. She rode north to the mountain on a Sunday in late June. Martha had insisted she take a full day off, practically shoving her out the door with a packed lunch and orders to stop working herself into the ground. James had simply nodded his approval when she'd asked to borrow one of the horses. The ride-up was longer than she remembered, though maybe that was because she was going alone this time, picking her way carefully through terrain that looked different in full summer green. The snow was completely gone now, replaced by wildflowers and thick grass that whispered in the wind. She found the cabin exactly as she'd left it. Elias was out front, splitting wood with the same methodical efficiency she remembered. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, shading his eyes against the sun. "Wondered when you'd show up," he called out. Rosie dismounted, her legs stiff from the ride. "You were expecting me?" "Figured you'd come eventually. Been about 2 months. You keeping track?" "Maybe." He set down the axe and walked over, taking the horse's reins. "How's the ranch?" "Good. Busy. Hot as hell." "That's summer for you." He led the horse to the small stable, giving it water and a nosebag of grain. "You staying the night?" "If that's all right." "Wouldn't have asked otherwise." Inside, the cabin was exactly as she remembered. Small, spare, functional. But it felt different now. Not like a prison or a survival shelter, but like something else. A refuge, maybe. A place where the world's expectations couldn't reach. Elias made coffee while Rosie sat at the small table, her muscles slowly unclenching in the familiar space. "How have you been?" she asked. "Same as always. Garden's doing good. Got a new rifle. Shot a bear that was getting too comfortable near the cabin." "A bear?" "Black bear. Not that big, but persistent." He poured coffee into 2 cups. Took 3 shots to bring it down. Ate well for a week after that. They fell into easy conversation, trading stories about the past 2 months. Elias told her about a rock slide that had nearly taken out his water source, about tracking a mountain lion that had been killing deer in the area. Rosie told him about the ranch work, about pulling another breech calf, about learning to break horses without getting herself killed. She didn't mention her mother's visit, not yet. They ate lunch outside, sitting on the porch with their backs against the cabin wall. The view stretched out endlessly, mountains and sky and forest that seemed to go on forever. "I miss this," Rosie said quietly. "The view?" "The quiet. Don't get much of that at the ranch. Always someone talking, always something that needs doing right now. That bothering you?" "No, just different." She took a sip of water from the canteen Elias had given her. "Sometimes I forget what it's like to just be still." Elias was quiet for a moment. "You can come up here whenever you need to. I meant what I said about the door being open. Even if I show up unannounced, especially then." The simplicity of the offer made her chest tight. No conditions, no expectations, just an open door. They spent the afternoon working together like they had during the winter, Elias showing her where he'd expanded the garden, pointing out plants she could harvest, teaching her to identify animal tracks that had been pressed into the soft dirt near the creek. It was different from ranch work. Slower, more contemplative. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they sat by the fire pit outside and Rosie finally told him about her mother. She showed up at this ranch 3 weeks ago, she said, staring into the flames. Drunk, angry, trying to guilt me into coming back or giving her money or... I don't know what she wanted, really. Elias prodded the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. What'd you do? Told her no. Told her I didn't owe her anything. Rosie's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched tight in her lap. She's in jail now. Tried to rob Pritchard's store. They gave her 60 days. How do you feel about that? I don't know. I should feel something, right? She's my mother. But mostly I just feel relieved, and then guilty about feeling relieved. You know that's normal, right? Is it? Yeah. Elias set down the stick he'd been using. My father was a mean drunk. Beat my mother until she stopped arguing with him. Beat us kids if we looked at him wrong. When he died, Horse kicked him in the head down at the stables. I felt relieved. And then I felt guilty. And then I felt angry that I felt guilty. Whole mess of things all at once. Rosie looked at him in surprise. He'd never talked about his father before, never mentioned that kind of history. What did you do? Kept living. Figured that was the best revenge, building a life that was nothing like his. Marrying someone kind, being a good father to my daughter while I had her. His voice caught slightly on the last part, but he pushed through. Your mother doesn't get to define you, Rosie. You get to do that yourself. I'm trying. I know. And you're doing a damn good job of it. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned down to embers and the stars came out overhead. Eventually, Elias stood and stretched. You're taking the bed tonight. I'll sleep out here. I can sleep outside. Probably, but you rode 15 miles to get here. Take the bed. Rosie knew better than to argue when he used that tone. She went inside, settled into the narrow bed that smelled like pine and wood smoke, and fell asleep faster than she had in weeks. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Elias was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same focused efficiency he brought to everything. Morning, he said without turning around. Sleep all right? Better than I have in a while. Mountain air does something to you. They ate breakfast on the porch, watching the sun rise over the peaks. When it was time for Rosie to leave, Elias walked her to the stable and helped her saddle the horse. You coming down to the ranch again soon? She asked. Maybe in a few weeks. Need to help James with the timber harvest. Good. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his dark eyes. You did good standing up to your mother. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about that. I won't. Good. The ride back down the mountain felt shorter somehow, like the distance between her two worlds had compressed. By the time she reached the ranch, the sun was high overhead and the heat was oppressive. Martha met her in the yard, hands on her hips. Well, how was it? Good. Quiet. And Elias? Same as ever. Martha's smile was knowing. That man's got it bad for you, you know. Rosie felt heat rush to her face that had nothing to do with the summer sun. What? No, we're just... He saved my life, that's all. Sure, and I'm the Queen of England. Martha laughed at Rosie's expression. Oh, honey, everyone can see it except you two. The way he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching. The way you light up when someone mentions his name. I do not... You absolutely do, and that's fine. He's a good man. Bit rough around the edges, but good. Martha started toward the house. Just don't wait too long to figure it out. Life's too short for that kind of hesitation. Rosie stood in the yard, Martha's words echoing in her head. Did Elias look at her differently? Did she light up when people mentioned him? Maybe. She pushed the thought aside and went back to work. The ranch didn't stop for romantic complications. The weeks that followed were brutally hot and relentlessly busy. The hay needed cutting and baling, the cattle needed moving to higher pastures, and one of the barns needed re-roofing before the summer storms hit. Rosie worked alongside the ranch hands, earning their grudging respect through sheer stubborn persistence. She learned to swing a scythe without cutting her own legs off. She learned to stack hay bales in the barn loft without losing her balance and breaking her neck. She learned to read the sky for signs of weather turning bad, to know when to bring the horses in and when to let them stay out. And slowly, imperceptibly, she stopped being the new girl who'd shown up half dead in the winter. She became just Rosie, one of the crew. It was late July when her mother got out of jail.
The news came via a ranch hand who'd been in Copper Falls picking up supplies. He mentioned it casually over dinner, not realizing the weight of what he was saying. Saw Iris Harper walking out of the jailhouse this morning. Looked rough. Sheriff told her to get out of town or he'd find another reason to lock her up. Rosie's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Martha, sitting across from her, caught her eye and gave a small shake of her head. Don't react. Not here. Not in front of everyone.
Rosie forced herself to take a bite of food, to chew and swallow normally, to act like the news didn't make her stomach clench with anxiety. After dinner, she found James in his office, a small room off the main house where he kept the ranch's books and records. "You heard?" he said without looking up from the ledger he was reviewing. "Yeah." "She comes here again, same rules apply. She's not welcome." "What if she doesn't come here? What if she waits until I'm in town or out on the range?" James set down his pen and looked at her directly. "Then you handle it the same way you did last time. You stand your ground and you don't give her an inch." He paused. "You want me to assign someone to ride with you when you're working away from the ranch? No, that'd just make me look weak." "Protecting yourself isn't weakness." "I know, but I need to be able to do this myself." James studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you carry that knife Elias gave you. And if she threatens you, if she so much as looks at you wrong, you tell me. Understood?" "Understood." But the confrontation didn't come. Days passed, then weeks, and there was no sign of Iris Harper. The sheriff reported that she'd left Copper Falls, headed south toward the mining camps. Some said she'd found work in one of the saloons. Others said she'd just kept drinking until someone else took her in or kicked her out. Rosie tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the work, on the rhythm of the ranch, on building the life she'd started to create. Elias came down from the mountain in mid-August to help with the timber harvest. He brought his axe and his expertise, and for 2 weeks he worked alongside James and the ranch hands, felling trees and hauling logs down to the mill. Rosie watched him work when she thought no one was looking, watched the way his muscles moved under his shirt, the way sweat made his dark hair stick to his forehead, the easy competence he brought to dangerous work. And she thought about what Martha had said, about the way he looked at her. One evening, after a long day of work, she found him down by the creek, washing the sawdust and sweat from his face and arms. The sun was setting, casting everything in golden light. "Hey," she said, approaching quietly. He looked up, water dripping from his beard. "Hey yourself. You leaving soon? Going back to the mountain?" "Day after tomorrow. James has got the rest handled." Rosie sat down on the bank, pulling off her boots and dangling her feet in the cool water. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why'd you really help me? That night in the snow?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, still kneeling by the water's edge. "I told you. Would have been wrong not to. But you could have taken me to town. Could have left me at the doctor's office or the sheriff's. You didn't have to bring me to your cabin, didn't have to teach me, didn't have to let me stay." "No, I didn't have to." "So why did you?" He stood, water dripping from his hands, and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because when I found you in that snow, you reminded me of every person I've ever failed to save. My wife, my daughter, even my mother when I was too young to do anything about my father's fists." He took a breath. And I thought, here's one person I can save. One person I can teach to survive. Maybe that doesn't fix anything. Maybe it doesn't bring them back, but it's something. Rosie felt tears burning in her eyes. "I'm not them. I know that. Known it from the start." He took a step closer. "But you're you, and that turned out to matter more than I expected." The air between them felt charged, electric. Rosie stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Elias?" "I know this is complicated," he said quickly. "I know you're building a life here, that you've got work and people who depend on you. And I'm just a man on a mountain who's probably too old and too broken to—" "You're not broken. I'm something close to it. So am I. We both are." She took a step toward him, closing the distance. Maybe that's why this works. Does it work? I don't know, but I'd like to find out. He reached out, his rough hand cupping her face with unexpected gentleness. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He kissed her then, soft at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might break or change her mind. But Rosie pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. Well, he said, that happened. Rosie laughed, slightly breathless. Yeah, it did. What now? I have no idea. Me neither. They stood there by the creek as the sun set and the stars came out, holding on to each other like lifelines in a storm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple. But it was real. And for two people who'd spent so long just trying to survive, real was more than enough. The next morning, Rosie woke early to find Martha already in the kitchen, kneading bread with a knowing smile on her face. So, Martha said without preamble, you and Elias finally figured it out. Rosie felt her face heat. How did you... Honey, you came back last night looking like you'd been struck by lightning, and Elias has been walking around with a smile on his face. Doesn't take a genius. It's complicated. Love usually is. Martha shaped the dough into loaves with practiced hands. What are you going to do about it? I don't know. He lives on the mountain. I live here. That's not exactly convenient. So? James and I courted for 2 years while he was working a ranch 3 days' ride away. We made it work. That's different. How? Rosie struggled for words. I'm still figuring out who I am, what I want. Adding a relationship to that feels like another complication you don't need? Martha's voice was gentle. Or like something that might actually make you happy. The question hit harder than Rosie expected. She'd been so focused on surviving, on proving herself, on building a life that was stable and secure. She hadn't really thought about happiness. I don't want to mess this up, she admitted quietly. Then don't. But also don't run from it because you're scared. Martha slid the loaves into the oven. That man cares about you, really cares. And from what I can see, you care about him too. That's not something to throw away just because it's complicated. Rosie thought about that for the rest of the day as she worked. Thought about Elias and the mountain and the life she was building at the ranch. Thought about whether it was possible to have both, or if she'd have to choose. That evening, she found Elias in the barn, packing his saddlebags for the trip back to the mountain. Can we talk? She asked. He looked up, his expression cautious. Sure. About last night. Look, if you're having second thoughts, I'm not. But I need to know what this is, what you want it to be. Elias set down the bag he'd been packing. What do I want? I want to see where this goes. I want to come down from the mountain more often. I want to write you letters and have you visit when you can, and maybe, eventually, figure out something more permanent. He ran a hand through his hair. But I also know you've got a life here, work you're good at, people who depend on you. I don't want to mess that up. What if we could do both? Both? I keep working the ranch during the busy seasons. You come down when you can, and when things are slower, I come up to the mountain. We figure it out as we go. Elias considered this. That could work. Wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing is easy. He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. When'd you get so wise? Learned from a grumpy mountain man. Grumpy? Little bit. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. All right, we'll try it your way. See how it goes. No promises? No promises. Just effort and honesty and seeing what happens. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no ring, no dramatic declaration, no certainty about the future. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that felt more solid than any fantasy. Elias left the next morning, but this time Rosie didn't watch from the window with a sense of loss. She waved him off openly, standing in the yard with Martha and James, and he waved back with a promise to return in 3 weeks. The summer rolled into autumn, and Rosie's life settled into a new pattern. Work at the ranch during the day, letters from Elias that arrived via supply wagons, visits to the mountain when the schedule allowed. It wasn't perfect. There were times when the distance felt like too much, when she wished he was there or she was there.
when the complications of maintaining two lives felt overwhelming.
But there were also moments of unexpected joy. Elias showing up unannounced with fresh game he'd hunted. Rosie riding up to the cabin to find wildflowers on the table. Quiet evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. And slowly, carefully, they built something that looked like a future. It was late September when Iris Harper showed up again.
This time, she didn't come to the ranch. She was waiting in Copper Falls when Rosie rode in to pick up supplies, standing outside the general store like a ghost. Rosie couldn't quite shake. She looked worse than before, thinner, older, with a desperation in her eyes that was almost frightening. "Rosie," she said, her voice rough, "I need to talk to you."
Every instinct told Rosie to walk away, to get on her horse and ride back to the ranch without looking back. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe pity, maybe the last stubborn thread of obligation, made her stop. "What do you want?" "I'm dying," Iris said it flatly, without drama. "Doctor says it's my liver, maybe 6 months if I'm lucky. Probably less." Rosie felt the words hit her like a physical blow. "I'm sorry." "Are you?" "Yes, I wouldn't wish that on anyone."
Iris laughed, bitter and broken. "Not even your terrible mother who made your life hell?" "Not even her." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. People were watching. Rosie could feel their eyes, their judgment, their curiosity about this public confrontation. "What do you want from me?" Rosie asked quietly. "I don't know. Forgiveness, maybe? Or just acknowledgement that I messed up, that I was a terrible mother and you deserved better." The admission shocked Rosie more than the news about the illness. Her mother had never acknowledged fault before, never admitted to being anything other than a victim of circumstance. "You did mess up," Rosie said carefully. "You hurt me, made me feel worthless, left me to die in the snow." "I know. And I can't just forget that because you're dying. That's not how it works." "I know that too." Iris looked down at her hands, thin and shaking. "I'm not asking you to take care of me. Not asking for money or a place to stay. I wanted you to know that I see what I did, that I'm sorry, even if sorry doesn't fix anything." Rosie didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to tell her mother to go to hell, that apologies meant nothing after years of abuse. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, recognized the courage it took to admit fault, to face the consequences of a lifetime of bad choices. "I accept your apology," Rosie said finally, "but I can't have you in my life, not the way you want. I've built something here, something good, and I can't let you destroy it." "I understand." "Do you?" "Yeah, I do." Iris turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. You survived despite me. That takes strength." She walked away before Rosie could respond, disappearing into the crowd of townspeople going about their business. Rosie stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then she went into the store, bought the supplies she needed, and rode back to the ranch in a daze. Martha found her in the barn that evening, sitting in an empty stall with her arms wrapped around her knees. "Heard you saw your mother in town." "News travels fast." "Always does." Martha sat down beside her in the straw. "You all right?" "She's dying. Liver's giving out." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" "Everyone keeps saying they're sorry, but I don't know if they mean it or if they're just saying what they think they should say. I mean it. Not because she deserves sympathy. She doesn't, really. But because it's hard for you. Because complicated grief is still grief." Rosie leaned her head back against the stall wall. She apologized, said she was proud of me. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know." Angry that it took dying to make her see what she did. Sad that it's too late to matter. Relieved that I don't have to carry her anymore. Rosie closed her eyes. "Is it wrong that I mostly feel relieved?" "No. It's human." They sat in silence for a while, the barn settling around them with the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. "What are you going to do?" Martha asked eventually. "Nothing. She made her choices. I'm making mine. And my choice is to keep building the life I've started here." "That's fair." "Is it, though? She's dying alone. Shouldn't I? Shouldn't you what? Drop everything to care for someone who never cared for you? Sacrifice the life you've built to make her last months comfortable?"
Martha's voice was firm. You don't owe her that, Rosie. You don't owe her anything. Then why do I feel guilty? Because you're a good person. Because despite everything, you still have compassion. But compassion doesn't mean self-destruction. You can feel sad about her situation without taking responsibility for it. Martha's words settled something in Rosie's chest, gave her permission to feel what she was feeling without judgment. Thank you. Any time. The next weeks were strange ones. Rosie threw herself into work trying to outrun the complicated feelings that kept surfacing. She rode harder, worked longer, pushed herself until exhaustion made thinking impossible. And when Elias arrived for his scheduled visit, she broke down. They were in the stable, ostensibly checking on a horse with a sore hoof, when it all came pouring out. The confrontation with her mother, the apology, the dying declaration, the guilt and anger and relief all tangled together in a knot she couldn't untie. Elias listened without interrupting, just let her talk until the words ran dry. Then he pulled her close and held her while she cried into his shirt. I don't know what to do, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. You don't have to do anything. It's not your responsibility to fix her or save her or make her last months meaningful. That's on her. But she's my mother. Biology doesn't obligate you to martyrdom. His voice was gentle but firm. You've spent your whole life trying to earn love from someone who wasn't capable of giving it. Don't spend your death trying to prove you're a good daughter. You've already proven more than you needed to. The words unlocked something in Rosie. She'd been so focused on what she should do, on what was right or fair or expected, that she hadn't stopped to ask what she wanted. And what she wanted was to move forward, to build a life with Elias, to keep working the ranch, to create something new instead of being dragged back into old patterns. I'm not going to see her again, Rosie said quietly. All right. That makes me a bad person, doesn't it? No. It makes you a person with boundaries. There's a difference. She pulled back to look at him. How did you get so wise? Practice, and a lot of mistakes. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. You're going to be all right, Rosie. Better than all right. But you've got to let yourself choose happiness without feeling guilty about it. I'm trying. I know. That night, they sat on the porch of the ranch house with Martha and James, talking and laughing until the stars came out. And for the first time in weeks, Rosie felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Her mother's choices were her mother's choices. Rosie's were her own. And she chose this. The ranch, the people who'd become family, the man who'd taught her she was worth saving. She chose to live instead of just survive. And that made all the difference. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains in mid-October with snow that blanketed the valley in white silence. Rosie stood at the window of the ranch house, watching the flakes fall thick and heavy, and remembered another winter, one that had nearly killed her, one that had changed everything. A year. It had been almost a year since Elias had pulled her from the snow. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, marveling at how different she felt now. Stronger, steadier, like someone who belonged in the world instead of someone the world had rejected. Behind her, Martha was preparing dinner, the familiar sounds of cooking filling the kitchen with warmth. James had come in from checking the livestock, stamping snow from his boots, and complaining good-naturedly about the early storm. Roads will be closed by morning, he said, hanging his coat by the door. Anyone planning to travel better do it now. Rosie turned from the window. Elias is supposed to come down this week. He'll wait it out. Man's not stupid enough to risk those mountain passes in this weather. But Rosie couldn't shake the worry that had settled in her chest. Elias was capable and experienced, but the mountain was unpredictable. She'd learned that firsthand. 3 days into the storm, when the snow was piled waist-high and the wind howled like something alive, a figure appeared at the edge of the property. One of the ranch hands spotted him first, a dark shape struggling through the drifts, leading a horse that looked ready to collapse. By the time they got him to the barn, Rosie had already recognized Cora's distinctive markings. Elias was half frozen, his face raw from the wind, ice crusted in his beard. But he was alive. You idiot, Rosie said, her voice shaking as she helped him inside. You could have died out there. Needed to see you, he managed through chattering teeth. Martha was already moving, getting hot water and blankets, barking orders at the ranch hands to tend to the horse. James helped Elias to a chair by the fire, while Rosie knelt beside him, pulling off his frozen gloves with trembling fingers. "This couldn't wait until spring?" she demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "No." He looked at her with those dark eyes, serious despite the cold that still gripped him. "It couldn't." It took an hour for him to thaw out enough to speak properly. Martha made him drink hot broth and wrapped him in enough blankets to stock a small hotel. Finally, when the color had returned to his face and his hands had stopped shaking, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made this," he said simply, handing it to her. Rosie opened it with careful fingers. Inside, nestled on a bed of cloth, was a ring. Simple, hand-carved from what looked like mountain ash, polished smooth and beautiful in its plainness. Her breath caught. "I'm not good with words," Elias said. "Never have been. But I know what I want. And what I want is to build a life with you. Doesn't matter if it's on the mountain or here at the ranch or somewhere in between. Just want it to be together." Rosie looked from the ring to his face, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. "Elias, you don't have to answer now. I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring things out. But I nearly died coming down this mountain, and the only thing I could think about was that I might not get to tell you. So I'm telling you, I love you, Rosie Harper, and I want to marry you if you'll have me." The kitchen had gone completely silent. Martha had stopped cooking. James had frozen with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Even the fire seemed to have quieted, waiting for her answer. Rosie looked at the ring, at this man who'd risked his life just to ask her a question, at the life she'd built from nothing but determination and borrowed courage. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." The smile that broke across Elias's face was like sunrise. He pulled her close, kissing her with cold lips that warmed quickly. And somewhere behind them Martha started crying, and James was clearing his throat roughly, and the whole kitchen erupted in the kind of joy that comes from watching two broken people find their way to wholeness. They married in December just after the first storm cleared. No church, no fancy ceremony, just them and Martha and James and a handful of ranch hands standing in the barn because it was the warmest place on the property, with the justice of the peace from Copper Falls reading the words that bound them together. Rosie wore a simple dress that Martha had helped her make, cream-colored wool that was practical and warm and beautiful in its simplicity. Elias wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard, looking almost civilized except for the wildness that never quite left his eyes. When the justice asked if anyone objected, there was a moment of silence. Rosie half expected her mother to burst through the doors, to ruin this like she'd tried to ruin everything else. But Iris Harper was dying in Copper Falls, alone in a rented room, too weak to cause trouble anymore. And Rosie was here, choosing her future instead of being chained to her past. "I do," she said, when it was her turn, her voice steady and sure. "I do," Elias echoed, sliding the wooden ring onto her finger with hands that only trembled slightly. And just like that, they were married. The celebration afterward was simple but full of life. Martha had made a feast despite the limited winter supplies, and someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the barn while snow fell softly outside. Rosie danced with Elias, with James, with each of the ranch hands who'd become her friends and co-workers. She danced until her feet hurt and her cheeks ached from smiling, until the cold drove everyone inside and the party moved to the kitchen, where it continued in warmth and laughter. Late that night, lying in the small room that had been hers for the past year, now shared with her husband, Rosie traced the wooden ring on her finger. "What are we going to do?" she asked quietly. "You live on the mountain. I work here. We figure it out." Elias pulled her closer, his warmth solid and reassuring. "Maybe I spend winters here, help James with the ranch work, summers on the mountain, or we build something new, a place that's ours, somewhere between here and there." That sounds impossible. "So did you surviving last winter? But here you are." She turned to face him in the darkness. "Are you scared?" "Terrified?" "Good. Me too." "Why is that good?" "Because if we're both scared, at least we're not stupid." She kissed him softly. "We'll figure it out. Like everything else. One day at a time. One day at a time." The winter passed in a strange kind of peace. Elias worked alongside the ranch hands, his mountain skills translating surprisingly well to ranch work. He was good with the difficult horses, better with tracking when livestock wandered off in the snow. The other hands respected him, and James valued his input on decisions about the property. And Rosie learned what it meant to be married to someone who actually saw her as an equal, not someone to be saved or managed or controlled, but a partner. They argued sometimes about money, about work, about whether to stay at the ranch or try the mountain in spring. But the arguments never felt dangerous. They felt like two people working toward solutions instead of one person trying to dominate the other. It was during one of these discussions, in late February when the snow was starting to melt and the first hints of spring were appearing, that Rosie realized something had changed in her body. She'd missed her monthly courses. Twice now. At first, she'd blamed it on stress or the hard work or just her body being irregular like it sometimes was. But then came the morning sickness, subtle at first but undeniable. She told Martha before she told Elias. They were in the kitchen, making bread, when Rosie suddenly had to run outside and empty her stomach into the snow. Martha followed her out, holding her hair back with knowing hands. "How far along?" she asked gently. "I don't know, maybe 2 months." "You told Elias yet?" "No, I wanted to be sure." "You're sure now?" Martha helped her stand, brushing snow from her skirt. "He's going to be happy, you know. Terrified, but happy." "What if I'm not ready? What if I mess this up like my mother messed me up?" Martha turned Rosie to face her, hands firm on her shoulders. "Listen to me. You are not your mother. You know what it feels like to be unwanted, unloved. You know exactly what not to do. That's more than most people start with. But what if that's not enough? Then you learn. You ask for help. You do better than what was done to you." Martha's voice softened. "That's all any of us can do." Rosie told Elias that night after dinner when they were alone in their room. She'd planned what to say, rehearsed it in her head a dozen times, but when the moment came, all her careful words fled. "I'm pregnant." Elias froze, his shirt halfway unbuttoned. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 2 months, I think." He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he sat down heavily on the bed, running his hands through his hair. Rosie's heart sank. "If you don't want..." "Don't want?" He looked up at her and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Rosie, I lost a daughter 5 years ago. I thought that part of my life was over, and now you're telling me we're going to have a baby? Is that good? Good? It's terrifying. It's the most terrifying thing I can imagine." He stood, crossing to her and pulling her into his arms. "And yes, it's good. It's so good I don't have words for it." She felt his tears on her neck, felt his whole body shaking with emotions too big to contain, and she held him while he cried, this strong man who'd survived alone on a mountain for 5 years, who'd saved her life and taught her to survive and loved her despite all her broken pieces. "I'm scared too," she whispered. "I don't know how to be a mother." "Neither of us knows what we're doing, but we'll figure it out, together." "Together," she agreed. The pregnancy changed things. Rosie couldn't do the heavy ranch work anymore, which frustrated her to no end. But Martha kept her busy with other tasks, managing supplies, keeping the books, planning for next year's planting, and Elias became fiercely protective, watching her like she might break at any moment. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him after he'd forbidden her from lifting a water bucket. "I know, but humor me. This is going to be a long 7 months if you don't relax." "Probably." But his protectiveness came from love, not control. She could see the difference. When she put her foot down about something, he listened. When she needed space, he gave it. They were learning each other's boundaries, figuring out how to be partners in this new adventure. It was late March when word came about Iris Harper. She died. Liver failure, just like the doctor had predicted. Died alone in that rented room with nothing but empty bottles for company. The sheriff sent a messenger asking if Rosie wanted to make arrangements for burial. She stood in the yard reading the message, feeling nothing, or maybe everything, compressed into a ball so dense it had no weight. "You all right?" Elias asked, coming up behind her. "She's dead. My mother. She died yesterday." He put his arms around her, one hand resting protectively on her still small belly. "I'm sorry." "Are you?" "I'm sorry it hurts you, even if you think it doesn't." And he was right. Somewhere beneath the numbness was grief. Not for the mother she'd had, but for the mother she'd never gotten to have. For the relationship that could have been if Iris had been different, if the world had been kinder, if things had gone another way. "I should go to the funeral," Rosie said quietly. "You don't owe her that." "I know, but I need to. For me, not for her. I need to close this door properly." They rode to Copper Falls together, Rosie and Elias and Martha, who insisted on coming for support. The funeral was small. Just a few people from the town who'd known Iris, mostly other drinkers and saloon workers. No one had particularly kind words to say, and the service was brief and impersonal. Rosie stood at the graveside, looking down at the simple wooden coffin, and tried to find something to feel besides relief. "I'm sorry you were so unhappy," she said quietly. "I'm sorry drinking was the only thing that made the pain stop. I'm sorry you couldn't love me the way I needed to be loved." She paused, one hand on her belly where new life was growing. "But I'm not going to carry your pain anymore. I'm not going to let what you did define what I become. This baby," her voice caught, "this baby is going to know love, real love, the kind that doesn't come with conditions or cruelty, and that's how I'm breaking the cycle. That's how I win." Elias squeezed her hand. Martha dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. And Rosie turned away from the grave, walking back toward the wagon and the ranch and the life she'd chosen for herself. She didn't look back. Spring came to the valley in a rush of green and birdsong and new beginnings. The ranch came alive with activity, calving and planting and the endless work of preparation. Rosie's belly grew, her body changing in ways that were both frightening and miraculous. And as summer approached, she and Elias finally made a decision about their future. They would build a house, not on the high mountain where winters were brutal, and not down in the valley where Elias felt confined, but somewhere in between, on a piece of land James was willing to sell them, high enough for Elias to breathe, but low enough for Rosie to stay connected to the ranch community. The house went up slowly, built with logs Elias felled and shaped with his own hands, with help from James and the ranch hands on their days off. It was small but solid, with a good fireplace and windows that faced east toward the sunrise. Rosie helped where she could, though mostly she supervised and made plans for the interior. A proper kitchen with shelves for supplies, a bedroom with space for a cradle, a porch where they could sit and watch the valley spread out below them. By August, when the heat was oppressive and Rosie's belly was huge and she felt like she might burst at any moment, the house was finished enough to move into. They spent their first night there lying on the floor because the bed wasn't built yet, looking up at the rough-hewn ceiling beams and laughing at the absurdity of it all. "We're really doing this," Rosie said. "Appears so. Building a house, having a baby, trying to be normal people. We're not normal people. Never will be." "No, but maybe that's all right. Maybe it's better than all right." The baby came in early September during a thunderstorm that rattled the new windows and made the whole house feel like it was holding its breath. Martha was there, experienced and calm, talking Rosie through the contractions while Elias paced outside like a caged animal. The labor was long and brutal, hours of pain that made Rosie understand why women died doing this, why it was called labor and not something gentler. But then, just as dawn was breaking and the storm was clearing, there was a cry, high and thin and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Martha said, tears streaming down her face as she placed the bloody, squirming bundle on Rosie's chest. A daughter. Rosie looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and more beautiful than anything she'd ever seen. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a full head of dark hair like her father's, eyes that would probably be dark too, once they focused. "She's perfect," Rosie whispered. Martha cleaned them both up, then called Elias inside. He came in slowly like he was approaching something holy, his face a mixture of terror and wonder. "You can hold her," Rosie said. He sat on the edge of the bed and Rosie transferred the baby into his arms with careful movements. The way he looked at their daughter, like she was made of spun glass and starlight, like she was the most precious thing in the world, made Rosie's heart ache with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "What should we name her?" Elias asked, not taking his eyes off the baby's face. They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at this new life they'd created, Rosie knew exactly what felt right. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope."
because that's what she was. Proof that broken people could create something whole, that survivors could do more than just survive. They could build and grow and love. Elias smiled through his tears. Hope Blackthorn. I like that.
The first months with Hope were exhausting and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Rosie learned to feed her, change her, soothe her when she cried in the middle of the night. Elias built a proper cradle and paced the floor with her when Rosie was too tired to move. Martha visited often, bringing food and advice and the kind of grandmotherly love that made Rosie ache for what she'd never had. James came too, gruff and uncomfortable around the baby at first, but gradually softening until he was making faces to get her to smile. And slowly, Rosie realized something fundamental. She was good at this. Not perfect. She made mistakes, second-guessed herself, had moments of panic when Hope wouldn't stop crying and she didn't know why. But she was good enough. She was loving and patient and determined to do better than what had been done to her. That was all that mattered. Winter came again, closing them into the small house with snow piled high outside. But this winter was different from the last. This winter, Rosie wasn't fighting for survival. She was living. On Christmas morning, she stood at the window with Hope in her arms, watching Elias chopping wood outside. The baby cooed and grabbed at her mother's hair, and Rosie kissed her soft head, breathing in that perfect baby smell. "You're going to know you're loved," she whispered to her daughter. "Every single day. You're going to know you matter, that you're wanted, that you're enough exactly as you are." Hope gurgled in response, her dark eyes already showing hints of awareness and personality. Behind them, the fire crackled warmly. The house smelled like the bread Rosie had baked yesterday, and the pine boughs she'd hung over the door. Simple things, ordinary things. Things that felt like miracles to someone who'd once been left to die in the snow. Elias came in, stamping his feet and bringing the cold with him. He crossed to them, wrapping his arms around both Rosie and Hope, creating a circle of warmth and safety. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different this is. From last year. From every year before. Different good or different bad? Different perfect." He kissed her temple. "Nothing's perfect." "No. But this is close enough." And it was. Their life wasn't a fairy tale. The house was drafty in places, money was tight, and there were still hard days when the past rose up to haunt her. Days when Rosie looked at Hope and feared she'd somehow fail her, somehow repeat the patterns she'd learned. But those days were getting fewer. And on the good days, the majority of days now, Rosie could see clearly what she'd built. A home, a family, a life that was hers by choice, not circumstance. She'd walked into the snow expecting to die. Instead, she'd found a man who'd taught her she was worth saving, who'd given her time and space to discover she was worth more than anyone had ever told her. And together, they'd created this. A daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, a home that kept out the cold, a future that stretched ahead full of possibility instead of pain. Spring would come again, the snow would melt, the flowers would bloom, and life would continue its endless cycle. But Rosie wasn't afraid of it anymore. She'd learned that she was stronger than the mountain, tougher than the winter, more resilient than anyone had given her credit for. She'd learned that survival was just the beginning. The real work came after, in choosing to live fully, to love deeply, to build something meaningful from the wreckage of what came before. And she'd learned that the best revenge against those who'd hurt her wasn't anger or bitterness. It was this: choosing joy, choosing love, choosing to be the parent she'd never had, the partner she'd never seen modeled, the person she'd always needed someone to believe she could be. Outside, the snow fell gently on the new house on the mountain. Inside, a family slept warm and safe, 3 hearts beating in sync. The girl who'd been unwanted, unloved, left for dead, had become a woman who knew her worth. A wife, a mother, a survivor who'd learned to do more than just survive. And in the quiet darkness, with her husband's arms around her and her daughter breathing softly against her chest, Rosie Harper Blackthorn finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, not a building, but this, the choice to love and be loved, to create safety where there'd been danger, to break cycles and start new ones. She'd walked into the snow expecting an ending. Instead, she'd found a beginning. And that made all the difference.